This is the only course you need in order to understand and master n8n. And I don't say that lightly. If you sit through the entire video, follow along and actually build what I'm showing you, you will understand AI agents, AI workflows, how to connect and automate various platforms using API connections, how to debug your workflows, and automation architecture. And by watching this video, you will be better than 95% of people experimenting with AI automations right now. But here's the thing, this is not a background video. If you're not willing to open n8n in another tab on your screen and follow along, just save this video for later, because this is going to get pretty detailed. Don't worry, because I structured this course properly. There are timestamps below, so if you already understand certain sections, just skip using the timestamps underneath the video. If you only care about AI agents, skip over to that part. If you only care about AI workflows, just skip along the video to that part. But if you're just getting started with n8n, I recommend you watch the entire video in the order in which I created the course, because this is built progressively. We're going to start at beginner level foundations that every single newbie to n8n should know to start with, before then moving into more intermediate and advanced workflow build-outs. Anyways, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Just so that we're both on the same page, here is what we're going to cover throughout this course. In part 1, we'll be talking about the n8n, answering questions like what even is n8n in the first place, what is it best used for, what are AI agents, what are AI workflows, when should you be using them, depending on your business use cases. And before you know it, we will be inside of part 2, where it's all about jumping into n8n, setting up your account, going button by button through every individual section of the n8n platform. And the main goal of part 2 of this video is to make you comfortable inside of n8n so that you're familiarized with every single tool, button, and feature, so that n8n becomes a lot more intuitive to use after that. As you can probably tell by my other videos, I hate the boring, nerdy, technical theory side of things. So in part 3, we will jump head in first and we will build our first ever AI agents. And throughout that third section, the idea is to just start putting in the reps of actually building out the workflows, understanding how to scope them, how to build them out, how to debug them, and how to push them live. In part 4, we will take a little step back. We'll go through some of the critical n8n concepts, covering things like field mapping, hard coding data, node and data types, sticky notes and how to document your workflows, and a bunch of other funky things that only the top 1% of n8n users are aware of. Things like shortcuts that will save you hours inside of n8n, as well as n8n templates that you can access so that you don't need to build workflows completely from scratch every single time. In part 5, we'll be walking through all the different types of triggers, because all of these fancy AI automations will only work if you find the right trigger. So part 5 of this video will be totally focused on just understanding what trigger to choose for your workflows that you will be building out in the future. Okay, moving on, in part 6 of the course, we'll be talking about how to connect n8n to any non-native integrations, tools, or external apps using HTTP API requests. And don't worry, you wouldn't be nerdy, technical, and all it will require is for you to remember one simple prompt and one simple hack that I teach you. Moving into part 7, we'll be talking about how to scope and sell automations, and specifically I'll be sharing everything that I learned over the last 3 years of running my own agency, where we implement primarily clay.com, but also end up having to sellotape a lot of the workflows inside of Clay using tools like n8n in the process as well. Before then wrapping up in part 8 of the course by talking about how you can become increasingly dangerous inside of n8n, and how you can really master n8n and go from complete newbie beginner all the way through to becoming an advanced n8n power user. Anyways, let's crack on with the video. In part 9, I'll briefly reflect on my experience of in scoping, implementing, and selling AI automations, specifically how to document, templatize, and build automations from scratch, before wrapping up the video with talking about how you can get increasingly dangerous inside of n8n as you go from a confused, overwhelmed beginner to n8n all the way through to an intermediate and an advanced power user. So let's just start with a basic question. What even is n8n in the first place? Simply put, n8n n8n is a visual automation builder. It's a platform that allows you to connect different apps, tools, APIs all together so that they can all talk to each other and execute processes automatically. And simply put, if you used Zapier or Make.com before, it's a super similar concept to that, but just put on steroids. So if we head over to the n8n website for a second and look at a random diagram, we will see an automation being visualized, as you can see on the screen right now. So let's take a look into this use case in a bit more detail. It says over here that this is a template to onboard new employees into the IT operations team. And as you can see over here, on the left of the trigger, there is typically this high voltage emoji, which looks a bit like the energy emoji on the left-hand side over here. And typically this emoji is on the left of the trigger of the entire workflow. Worth noting that every single automation inside of n8n must have a trigger. So for context, the trigger is the thing that sets off the domino effect, which then causes a series of actions. So the way that n8n works is that you need to have a trigger in place. So in this case over here, we can see that the trigger is a form submission. So as soon as this create user form is submitted, this data then gets pushed into the AI agents, which then proceeds with the next steps. To further simplify things, it's very important to understand that before you build out any automation or any workflow, you need to understand what you're doing manually already. So typically, whenever you're building this kind of workflow, like the one that you can see on the screen right now, you should have scope this workflow, meaning that you start off by noting down what the trigger is, what's the first step that causes the rest of the workflow to run, and what are the consequent actions. Now, every single step, including the trigger inside of the workflow, will be known as a node. And a node is the same as an action or an enrichment inside of clay.com, for example. So a node is just any step along the way that you have to add as you build out an n8n automation. So if I go into my n8n account right now, and if I click on the plus button in the top right, I will see that I can add conditional logic to the workflows. Now, here's what makes n8n extremely powerful. It doesn't just connect apps, it also lets you control the logic between the different nodes. So as an example over here, we can see that after the AI agent stack, we're seeing if the person that's being onboarded is a manager, and if it's a manager, they will be routed to the top where we'll create a new channel for them. And if it's not a manager and this condition is false, we can then route them to update their profile on Slack. So this is an example of conditional rules that you can set inside of a specific node in n8n, which then gives more versatility and more options to your workflow. So it's a lot more flexible, and so that you can route data and decisions based on certain conditions. So instead of just automating, when this happens, do that, like most Zapier beginners tend to do, you can build full systems. Lead routing systems, client onboarding systems, content engines, AI agents for sales or for marketing. And because it's super flexible, you're not just boxed into the templates. You can build anything out completely from scratch, as long as you know what the trigger for the workflow is, and as long as you can figure out what the consequence nodes are that will enable you to create the full automation. Now that we understand what n8n actually is, it's about time to talk about one of two things that you will be building inside of n8n in order to build any sort of AI automation. Your choice here is really between two things. The first thing is AI workflows, and the second thing is the AI agents. So in order for us to understand both AI workflows and AI agents, it's first important to understand how an average user uses AI in the first place. Typically, most people use AI by feeding it some sort of input, then the large language model then does something to that input and transforms it into an output. So just to give you a good example here, let's imagine that I feed it an email that I wrote out for my colleague, and I asked the LLM to fix the spelling mistakes and to rewrite the email for me. The LLM will basically do that and turn it into an output. Needless to say, that's really mainstream. 99% of people are already doing it. So the real competitive advantage and the real wow factor inside of n8n comes when you combine this input LLM output model together with access to the tools that you use on a day-to-day basis. So not only are you able to now prompt the LLM by copying and pasting random text, but you can also then shape up the consequent actions that happen inside of all the other common tools and platforms that you would have to update manually otherwise. So here is where the AI workflows and AI agents come into place. And you can see a comparison over here of the same AI workflow and AI agent. And straight away, you can see that aesthetically speaking, just by looking at the structure of an AI workflow, you can see that it's completely different to an AI agent. So let's start off with AI workflows. AI workflows typically require an input, which will be your trigger in order to run the rest of the workflow. And what this basically means is that it's going to be a super linear workflow whereby the workflow will run the same way every single time, assuming that it has the same inputs. So let's say someone fills in a form on your website. On Webflow, that will be the trigger for an AI workflow, and this can then trigger a series of actions, but in order to perform each one of those actions, you will need to connect n8n to external source. So for example, if action number 1 is to research the lead, you will need to connect n8n to a tool like Gemini or Grok that can research the lead for you. Or if you want to then add this form submission to your CRM, you will need to connect n8n to your HubSpot CRM. As you can see by the structure of the AI workflow nodes, whereby it basically just all goes in a straight line, it's perfect for when the process is linear, when it's predictable, when there are no subjective decisions that really need to be made throughout that process, or when the process will be routinely the same every single time. If you just start building out an n8n workflow completely from scratch and you click on add first step and type in AI agents, by clicking on AI agents, you will see that typically this is the way that it's structured. You will first interconnect a chat model, and a chat model is some sort of large language model which will act as the brain behind the AI agents. The second thing will be the memory, and the memory is just all the knowledge and context the AI agent has to store based on the inputs from the user that uses this AI agent. So for example, if we prompt it with chat messages, this will all be saved in the form of the memory. And then the third thing that is critical for the AI agent to work well is the access to tools. So over here where it says tool, you can click on plus and you can connect multiple tools. So for example, if I connect it to Google Docs over here, by clicking on Google Docs tool, I will enable my AI agent to automatically create Google documents, to look up Google documents, duplicate existing templates, and basically use this tool to its full capacity, how a human would be able to use it otherwise. And one other thing that is super critical to understand about AI agents is that in order for them to have the right context and for them to understand how to actually act on every specific task that we feed to the AI agent, we need to set up something called a system prompt. And don't worry about it for now, because we'll be covering and building out an AI agent in just a couple of minutes from now. So let's take a step back and look at where AI agents should be used rather than AI workflows. And the way I like to think about it is that AI agents can make decisions, and specifically can make subjective decisions on what tools to call, what tasks to do, and so on. However, workflows just simply follow the guidelines that we set for them. So if the automation is unpredictable and requires subjective decisions, so the chances are an AI agent will be perfect in order to build that automation out. However, if the automation is linear and predictable and does not require making any subjective decisions in the process, we can stick with just building out an AI workflow. On balance, of course, AI workflows and AI agents will have their own use cases, but I would just be very wary of AI agents being overhyped these days, especially with the so-called AI SDRs, which have not proved to be successful to date. So my personal preference inside of n8n will always lean towards AI workflows, simply because they're more reliable, they're a lot more consistent, they're way more cost effective, a lot easier to debug and maintain, and that's not to mention the scalability, because in my opinion, AI workflows are a lot easier to scale. So the main idea behind this course is to start off by building a couple of AI agents before then moving into AI workflows, and after that, as you scope any future automation, it will be completely your choice whether to use AI agents or AI workflows. Okay, enough theory for now. Let's now sign up for an n8n account and have a look at every individual button, every individual feature inside of n8n that we need to be aware of. So for the purpose of this, just go do me a favor and click the second link in the description underneath the video right now so that you can get a 2-week extended free trial of n8n on me. And in that case, you should be on the website, which is n8n.io. And over here in the top right hand corner, you can click on Get Started. Now, this may get me into trouble, but one little hack that I discovered recently with most software websites is that you can use this website called tempmail.org, which I will make sure to add to the guide, which will be the top link in the description underneath the video. And over here, all we need to do is just copy to clipboard this random temporary email address that it generates for us. And in that case, I can copy and paste it over here as my company email and click on submit. And that way, whenever you sign up for free trials, you know that no one will hammer you with promotional emails from these random free trials that you're starting. And over here, you can see inside of my inbox, my code just arrived. Now I can just basically copy and paste this code and click on verify my, and that will enable me to then go ahead and create an account inside of n8n. So over here, after entering your full name, password, and account name, you can then click on start free trial, and it will then verify your email address for you. We'll ask you a bunch of random onboarding questions, and for the purpose of these ones, I'm just going to tick super random answers. It will also give you an onboarding tutorial, but for the time being, I'm going to click out into the n8n icon in the top left hand corner. We should be able to see our dashboard. In order for us to access our actual n8n account, we will always need to click on open instance. So let's just click into that over here, and we can now bookmark this page so we remember that this is where we go next time whenever we want to set up any sort of n8n automations. As soon as you are inside of your n8n account, you will typically have one of two options. You can either start with an existing pre-built n8n template, which I personally do not recommend because this will be way too complicated, and a lot of the time those templates will not be what you're exactly looking for. Alternatively, you can click on start from scratch at very bottom over. As soon as you click on start from scratch, you should be able to see the workflow, which will look something like this, and you can see it gives you the plus option to add your first step. And in this case, if you click on plus, you will see all the different nodes inside of n8n on the right hand side over here. And as I mentioned before, a node is just an action, it's just a step inside of n8n, so it should be super intuitive. And in order for us to create any sort of workflow, as I mentioned already, we would need to find a trigger. So the most mainstream triggers will always be in front of you over here. The ones that you really need to know for the time being is the manual trigger. And don't worry, we'll be covering all the different types of triggers later on, but for the time being, let's just look at one trigger at random. So for example, we can look at the form submission trigger. So let's just select that and click into that. And as soon as you click into any of the nodes, like I've done in this case, you can see the node settings. In this case, since our node is called on form submission, in the top left hand corner, we can rename it. So for example, I can type in trigger form submitted. And this will enable us to also create a form completely from scratch. So let's just imagine that we're creating a website form. I'll just type in website inquiry. We can give a quick description, something like, please fill in this form and we'll be in touch. And in order for us to actually create the form, we can then click on add form elements and just basically type in full name, and then click on add form attribute again, and then something like email address. And we will notice there are different element types. So for the email address, you may want to choose the email formatting so that it's more compatible for later stages. Typically inside of any n8n node, whenever you want to try it out and test run it, you would need to click on execute step at the very top of the screen. And in that case, whenever you're doing it on a form submit, you can see that it's now listening for test form submission, and it basically opens up this pop-up, and in this pop-up, I'm just going to type in my full name and email address and click on submit, and this will trigger this specific node to run. When you're building your workflows inside of n8n, you will notice that there are different ways that you can view your data. So on the right hand side, you can see the output can be either JSON, table, or schema view. We will go a lot more in depth into the JSON structure of the data, but essentially in all three views, you see the exact same data, but presented in a different format. So the JSON view just shows you the raw structure of the data. This is the actual format that n8n uses behind the scenes, and everything inside of n8n runs on JSON, which is structured into key value pairs. So if we just have a look over here and we click into the JSON view, we should be able to see the full name, and then you can see Tim Jakobsen on the right hand side. So in this case, the key will be the full name and the value will be Tim Jakobsen. Same thing for the email address. The email will be the key, and then tim@b2b-boosted.com will be the value. That's all there is to JSON. It might look a bit nerdy, a bit intimidating at first, but all it is just structured text in a key value pair. Now, if we click on the schema view over here, we should be able to see the exactly same data, with the only difference being is that the schema view organizes the same data visually by fields. Instead of just showing raw text, it basically shows you the field name, the data type, and the nested structure. So for example, over here, the full name, on the left-hand side we can see the T, and that means that it's a text format. And don't worry, because I'll have a separate section in this video which explains and dives deeper into this. And then finally, the table view is the most intuitive. It just basically helps you to visualize the data like most of us prefer, whereby it's just in a super simple to use table format, very similar to Google Sheets or Excel. Now let's take a step back and dive deeper into the actual n8n account. So as soon as we inside of the n8n account, if you click into the overview page on the left side of the panel, you should be able to see all your workflows right in front of your eyes over here. Needless to say, regardless whether you're building AI agents or AI workflows, all of them will be over here, and all you would need to do is click on create workflow in the top right corner in order for you to start building out a workflow completely from scratch. Now, if you look next to the workflows in the middle of the screen, it also has credentials, and credentials are the same as your connections to other external platforms. For example, you will have a separate credential whereby you enable n8n to perform actions on your behalf inside of HubSpot, inside of Gmail, inside of Google Sheets, Google Docs, or any other tool that you connect to your n8n account. So whenever you're connecting any sort of tools, you should be able to see all of the login credentials in the credential tab over here. Moving on, you will also have a separate tab for execution. And as you can see right now, we ran this website inquiry form twice. And over here in the execute tab, you should be able to see every single record of every single data run inside of n8n. And this is particularly critical for two reasons. The first reason, sometimes you may wonder, when did this specific workflow run for the last time? In that case, you can just head over into your executions and you can see it over here. And the second reason is whenever you have a bug or an error inside of any n8n workflow, you can just head over to execution. Sometimes it will give you an error message over here, and then you can just click into the workflow on the left-hand side of the execution over here, and it will take you into that exact execution. It will show you the inputs, the out, and the steps that execution took, so that you can then backtrack and identify where the error is, whether it's in the first node, in the second node, or in the third node, for example. Now, more than that, two other tabs inside of the overview page in n8n, and the first tab over here that you can see is, and a variable is just a piece of data that you store and reuse. So the way that I personally think about variables is I'll look at them like snippets, and similar to how your computer sometimes pre-fills your card details and your email address and your delivery address on a lot of websites, this is basically the equivalent functionality inside of n8n, which basically enables you to pre-fill fields like your email address every single time automatically without you needing to retype it completely from scratch. So variables, very similar to snippets. We're not really going to be using them that much. It's a pretty new feature altogether, but for the time being, let's just park it there and remember that it exists. And the final section at the overview page over here consists of data tables, and data tables are just built-in storage within n8n. So think about it like an internal mini database, like an Airtable or Google Sheets equivalent that you can store inside of n8n. So for example, you may create a table and call it leads, and every time that someone submits an inquiry on your web, you may want to store it inside of a table inside of any, with columns like name, email address, LinkedIn profile, and a bunch of other data points. And this way you can access it directly from n8n without having to call an external tool like Airtable or Google. And you can add rows, update rows, delete rows, all within n8n without having to call and connect any external tools in the process. One other thing that is super important to understand inside of n8n is the fact that in the top left-hand corner, you should be able to see, so far we have used 0 out of 1,000 executions. And typically n8n charges you for executions, right? Which is the equivalent of operations inside of make.com, for example, or the equivalent of credits on any other platform out there. Please note that the executions only count when the workflow is published. So if we go back for a second into this past workflow where we just created the form submission as a trigger, we can see that this workflow is not live because in the top right hand corner, it does not say publish. However, if we click on publish over here, And if we give it a name like beta 101 and we click on publish, we should then be able to see that in the top right hand corner it now says published, which will mean that running this workflow even once will cost us 1 execution credit. All right, now just to oversimplify things for you, let's go back to this workflow whereby the trigger is a form submission. By now we should have added the form title, description, and 2 form elements in the form of the full name and the email. And what I want to do is just to create a really simple 2-node, 2-step automation whereby as soon as someone submits this form, we send them an email. And by building out this super simple 2-node automation, we will learn a bunch of things about how to connect credentials and a bunch of other cool stuff. So in this case, what we would need to do is click on the plus button over here. And as a next step, typically we need to ask ourselves, what node would we need to use in order to perform a specific action? In this case, assuming that you're a Gmail user, you can type in Gmail. If you're an Outlook user, you can type in Outlook, and they both have the same kind of actions over here. So in this case, since I'm a proud Gmail user, I can click on Gmail over here. And as soon as this form is submitted, I would want to send an email, right? So in order for us to send an email, we'll use this send a message. So if we can't find it over here, we can just type it in, send a message, and then let's click on send a message. And this will pop up with the node settings. At the top of the screen over here, we should be able to see where it says credential to connect with. And in this case, if we have not yet connected to this external platform like Gmail, it will always give us the option to create a new credential. So for this, we can just simply click on create new credential. And for the purpose of this, we can use the O of 2 recommended connection option. And at the bottom of the screen, regardless if you're connecting to Outlook, Gmail, or any other mainstream tool, should give us the option to sign in with the tool. So in that case, we're going to now sign in with my main email address. I'm going to click on continue. And of course, bear in mind that whenever we connect any external tools to n8n, we're giving it permission to perform certain actions on our behalf. So we need to be very careful. If you ever get stuck and you're unsure how to connect n8n to an external platform, all you need to do is just click on create new credential. And at the top of each node, you always says, do you need help filling out these fields? Open the docs. And whenever you click on these dots, it will redirect you to a designated page which walks you through how to connect this specific tool to n8n, which should make your life a lot easier. And if that page does not exist, don't worry, because we'll be talking about how you can connect any tool in the world to n8n using the HTTP API option. Okay, my friend, if we just double click into the Gmail node, we should be able to see that on the left-hand side that there is no data that we can yet play around with inside of the node settings over here, simply because it just seems that this is completely empty. In this case, let's just close and click on X over here, and we can just double click into the previous node and click on execute step so that we have this data to play around with. So for the time being, you can just go ahead and type in the full name and a random email address over here, and then just click on submit. And then you should be able to see that the data arrives instantly inside of n8n. And going forward, it's super critical for us to pin this data. So on the right-hand side over here, you should be able to see the pin icon. Make sure to pin this data so that we can rerun this workflow over and over again whenever we're just in the testing phase without having to every single time populate the form. And you should be able to see in future steps, in future nodes inside of n8n, that pinning data will be essential, enabling us to save a lot of time of otherwise having to do this manual data entry when testing out the workflow. After we're done with this, we should be able to click back into the send a message node. And now you should be able to see all the data on the left-hand side that you can map into this send a message node over here. Since we're already connected our Gmail accounts, we can now see that the resource is message. So we're basically emailing someone, we're sending them an email. And for this, where it says to, we have 2 options. The first option is we can hard code data. And when I say hard code, that basically means us having to type this data in manually, like test data, right? And whenever someone says placeholder data or hard coding data, it just means they're typing it in manually as a placeholder for now. But in this case, since this data already arrived from a previous form, we can just drag this data from a previous form on the left-hand side, or we can drag it over here. Now, you should be able to see on the right-hand side that it gives us two options. The first option is to have the data in a fixed view, and the second option is to have the data in an expression view. Now, every single time that you see this toggle choice between fixed data or expression data, it's basically n8n asking you one super simple question. Is this value static or dynamic? So if you're pulling in data from a previous node and you're dragging it across over here, it will tend to be in the expression view, because every single time you will have to be dynamically reliant on a previous node. Now, if we switch this to the fixed view, we can now just type in our email address, and this way this will be fixed every single time, and it will not rely on incoming data from a previous node. So this is critical to understand. So for the purpose of this, I'm going to flick into the expression view and I'm going to drag that email across. And on the right hand side over here, you should be able to see this open assistant pop up. So if we click on that, we can see the data nicely formatted over here. And we can even type something up like hi there, right? Or something like that. And on the left-hand side, you can see it in an expression view. And on the right-hand side, you can see how it actually looks aesthetically after you type it in an expression view over here as well. So simply put, all we're doing here is we're just mapping the variables from the form submission and dragging them along over here. As far as the subject line goes, we could just say something like website inquiry. And here you will typically have two options whenever you are sending any sort of messages, emails, or any sort of text, be it by WhatsApp, Telegram, Gmail, Outlook, or any other nodes that you use for messaging, emailing, or anything of that sort. So typically you have a choice between text and HTML. Now, by clicking into the email type and selecting text, this means that we cannot have any images, we cannot have any styling, any formatting, any buttons, and we cannot make the text bold or put any sort of italics text into the actual output. And don't worry, because this is perfect for any random email that you are sending out typically. However, if you want to structure your email very nicely and have some headings in bold and have some hyperlinks, in that case, you would need to change the actual email type over to HTML. And to be totally real with you, if you select text over here, you can just type it in really, really nicely. So you can say something like, hi Tim, how are you? How are you? As an example, right? And you can then just click on the toggle over here to expand it. And you can then just format it so it's going to be spread out like an actual, so something like this. And if that's the case, it's super simple to send the text message. However, if you wanted to send text like this and then hyperlink the onboarding link over here, then in that case, you would need to turn the email type into HTML. And in that case, you can then just head into ChatGPT, for example, or any other large language model of choice and just say, turn this text into HTML for an n8n node, and then you can just copy and paste the email text that you want to send across, and it will basically just provide the HTML for you, which will save you a lot of time having to, add random brackets and all this random stuff. And in that case, we can now just head over here, open up the toggle, and we can just basically copy and paste the text here. And over here, if we click on expression and we open up the toggle, we should be able to see on the right-hand side that this in HTML view, this is what the text actually will look like to the recipient of the email. And you can see that calendly.com in this case will be hyperlinked. Now, this is not really going to be a huge make or break moment for you, but it will spare you a couple of minutes of trial and error otherwise. So just make sure to switch between text and HTML depending on the use case. For the purpose of this one, because we will be using the variable from the past over here, we will now switch over to expression view. And in this case, I'm going to expand this bracket. And the reason for this one that we're using the expression view is because we want to pull up the full name. And in this case, if we just click on expanding this and we draft this completely from scratch, I can just type in hi, drag the first name from the form submission, assuming that we have just the first name field, and we can just type in something like how are you, question mark, and then just say best wishes, right? And after that, we can click on X in the top right-hand corner. Worth noting that most of the time, n8n will save our progress to date, so we don't need to anxiously press Command S like we would otherwise have to do inside of like Google Docs or something of that sort. And whenever we're ready to test out this workflow, we can then click on Execute Step. And at this point in time, you should be able to see if it says node executed successfully, that means that that email has been sent. And if you want to check that for yourself, you can either go back to your executions log to see over here that this has succeeded, and then you can click into it and you can see over here that it's ticked off. And on the right hand side, you should be able to see that, this email was sent, or if you go back to your Outlook or your Gmail or wherever you send this email from, you should be able to see in folder or inbox. So this email now being received, here it is. It says, "Hi Tim, how are you?" And at the bottom it says this email was sent automatically with n8n, and it gives you a link to n8n. Now, since we are on a free trial, we'll always display this promotion at the bottom of the email that you just sent. As soon as you upgrade to a paid plan with n8n, that should be removed by you heading over into the settings part of any of the nodes. And over here, there will be a toggle that you can switch off in order to basically switch off this promotion of n8n at the bottom of the email. Now that this send a message node has worked fine for us, as always, we can pin this data so that we don't need to all over again go and grab more data to rerun this workflow every single time. Now, worth noting, if you drag your keypad or your mouse all over the nodes inside of the n8n workflow, and if you click on P on your keyboard, you should be able to see that it unpins both of the nodes. And if you click on P again now, it should pin the nodes all over again. So that's a quick little shortcut for you to know in order for you to be able to unpin data and pin data super fast. Another quick shortcut for you is, instead of you every single time having to click on plus in the top right hand corner and then selecting the node, you can instead just click on tab on your keyboard and automatically this will pop up. So as soon as I click on tab, here we are. And as soon as I click again, here we are again. So all you need to do is just click on tab and make sure to multi-select the nodes and then just clicking on P on your keyboard in order to pin and unpin the data. More than that, I very much recommend that you start labeling your workflows. Otherwise, all of your workflows will be like my workflow, my workflow, my workflow. In this case, I'll say workflow 1, form submission to email. And this is something that we can reference later down the line. And for the time being, this is published. I would recommend for you not to publish it. So the way that you could do that is by clicking on the toggle over here and click on unpublish. And that way, there is no way that you're going to exhaust the 1000 executions throughout your free trial period. Now that we dived into the buttons inside of n8n, I'm sure that I sense a dopamine spike from your side. I'm sure you're all excited, you see the potential, and you really want to just start getting some reps in, building out AI workflows and automations completely from scratch. So for the purpose of this one, we're going to start off building your first ever full end-to-end workflow. And this time you'll be an AI agent, believe it or not, that you can then go and virtue signal about and flex to your friends, to your family, to your colleagues, just to show how advanced and how techy you actually are. So before we get carried away, the AI agent we will be building right now will perform the following actions. First of all, it will read our emails for us, because let's be real, who really likes to read and categorize emails in the first place? Definitely not me. And secondly, after you read those emails, it will automatically draft replies to those emails so that we don't have to. And as a third step of that workflow, we will add a human in the loop feature, which is a very important feature for you to know, which enables you to have a level of human review throughout the process to make sure that the AI does not hallucinate and mess up, which is very common with some AI agents. And there's a third step after we receive the email and we categorize the email and draft a reply to it, and we will add a human in the loop step, which is a manual step most commonly used inside of AI agents, which prevents the AI agents from hallucinating, and it ensures that there is a quality assurance check, which most folks prefer to have in this process rather than automating something only to then realize that the AI agent messes up and creates a bunch of errors. And of course, to top it all off, as soon as that email draft is then approved, we will then reply to any emails that come into our inbox automatically. Now, before you jump into any kind of AI workflow or AI agent, I very much recommend for you to write down in one column what we're actually trying to do. So for example, in this case, we're reading our Gmail, we're drafting replies, we're reviewing the reply draft, and then we're replying with an email. And after you write what we do in one column, you will then need to research and decide what node to use in order to pull off this specific action that we're trying to do in the first place. So for example, for reading our Gmail, we'll use the Gmail trigger node, right? For drafting replies, we'll use the AI agent node. And this makes our life a lot easier when actually building out the actual workflow, because this acts largely as our scoping stage of designing an n8n workflow. So for the purpose of this one, let's head over into our n8n account, click on the house overview tab on the left side of the panel, and here we can click on create workflow. If we refer back to our table right now, we should be able to see that the trigger for this will be reading our Gmail or Outlook. In this case, what you need to do is click on add first step or click on tab on your keyboard, and that will automatically on the right hand side show you all the triggers that are on offer. In this case, because we're so confident, we can type in Gmail or Outlook.
And regardless which one you use, you should be able to see that the trigger is the same. It will say on message received. And in this case, we're just going to select the on message received trigger. By now, we should already be signed into our Gmail account or our Outlook account. In that case, if you are still not signed in, just click on create a new credential and then sign in with Google Outlook at the bottom over here. And the one super important thing that we need to make sure that we don't get wrong right now is we need to select how often this workflow will run. So under the Gmail trigger over here, we'll give you a mode, and as the default option, it will say every minute. And trust me, you do not want to be running this every minute. So I would recommend let's run it every day for now, and the event will be a message received. For the time being, assuming that you get a ton of emails in your inbox every day, just click on fetch test events, and you should be able to see it just fetched a random email from your email inbox. In that case, just proceed over into the schema view and make sure to pin the data by clicking on the pin icon in the top right hand corner of the node settings. In this case, we can see that the previous email that arrived has been this email which says, "Hi Tim, how are you?" And this was the email that we actually drafted as a part of the previous workflow build out. So we can pin it for testing this later down the line. In order for us to stay organized, I very much recommend that we start labeling every single node in the process. So for the purpose of this one, you can just basically select the node on the screen and click on space in your keyboard, and that will enable you to rename this. I'll just call this trigger new email received. And that way we're staying organized from step one of this build out. Now, in order for us to be able to categorize and manage our email inbox, one way to do that will be through the use of AI agents. So for the purpose of this one, finally, the time has come for us to build an AI agent. So click plus over here and let's type in AI agent. Then we can select the AI agent node, and for the time being, we can click on X because we will see that by default, whenever we select the AI agent node, it comes with 3 routes. The first route is the chat model, so we can just click on plus over here. And remember that the chat will act as the brain behind this AI agent. For the purpose of this one, I'm going to select OpenAI chat model. You can select whatever random AI model of choice, whether it's OpenRouter or Claude or anything else. I honestly don't mind. And typically, since you are a newbie to n8n, you should have this claim credits offer, which enables you to claim some free credits. So just click claim credits, and that should be a good way for you to just get a bunch of free credits, especially if you switch between different LLM models in the process. All right, so by now we should have a Gmail trigger over here, whereby as soon as we receive a new email, this data will then be passed into an AI agent. So far, we connected the AI agent to our LLM of choice. In this case, it's OpenAI. Now, the second thing that we would need to connect to the AI agent is the memories. Let's click on plus over here. There should be some random memories at the bottom over here, which could be quite distracting for the time being. So let's just stick to simple memory for now. So we just need to click on simple memory. And at the bottom over here, it will say context window length. If you're not familiar with the context window length, it's basically a setting over here. And if we say 5, that means that this AI agent will remember the last 5 messages that it has been sent on a specific task. So whenever we feed any sort of input into an AI agent, this will dictate how many previous chats this agent will remember. So in this case, if you're building an AI customer support agent, you may want to increase the context window to the last 50 chats, just so that it remembers the full past conversation. But for the time being, let's just keep it at about 10 past messages, just so that it remembers the last 10 messages that it has received. And that it will store that as simple memory. More than that, over here where it says tool, we can click on plus over here as well. And as far as the tools go, you will have a bunch of different options. So for example, you can connect this AI agent to other workflows that you build. If you select this call n8n workflow tool, this will be a bit too advanced for now. Or you can just type in the name of a tool that you want to connect the AI agent to over here. So for the time being, let's just type in Sheets as an example. And in this case, we can connect Google Sheets to the AI agent so that the AI agent can reference the Google Sheets whenever it's coming up with any of its actions or answers. So for the purpose of this, again, if we're selecting the Google Sheets node, we need to click on select credential, create new credential, and then sign in with our Google account. And as soon as you have signed into this, you can then just select a relevant Google Sheet or relevant documents that you want to reference for this. In my case, I'm going to reference my email inbox FAQs, which sadly right now consist of just one question and just one answer, which is super common. And the most common question that I get right now is, I am not logged into Unlock Clay. I am not logged into Unlock n8n, which is my new course that's just coming out as you're watching this video. And the answer to that by default will be, hey, just head over to this website and you can reset your password, right? And for the purpose of this one, we're going to select this document. We're going to select the relevant sheet. So it's sheet 1. So for this, all we need to make sure is that we're connected to this Google Sheets so that the AI agent can look up the questions and the answers, and based on that, it can then draft a reply to any emails that are coming in. Let's click on execute step, and that way we can pull in all the information over here so we can see the question, we can see the answer, and that will be stored in the knowledge by the AI agent. Now, really quickly, before we set up the system prompt and the user prompt inside of our LLM node, we need to understand what they are and what the differences are. So first of all, let's talk about the system prompts. And the system prompt just defines how the AI should behave. It sets the personality, the rules, the constraints, gives it all the context. For example, saying stuff like, hey, you are Tim's executive assistant. The better system prompts typically have the decision-making frameworks, and you can think about it like the operating system for the agent. So, for example, you are a helpful, kind customer support assistant. Always respond concisely, never make cut information. If you're unsure, ask a clarifying question. Could be some lines that you will find in a system prompt for a customer support agent. But please note, the system prompt will then apply to every single time that any input comes in going forward. So think about the system prompt as the long-term thing that you set up once, and it will shape the way that the output is delivered every single time going forward. So as a quick analogy, the system prompt is basically like a job description, and the user prompt is just a task that needs to be completed today, right? So with that knowledge in the back of our mind, if we head back into the AI agent node over here, just double click into it, we should be able to see add option at the bottom, and it will give us the system message option. So if you spend a couple of seconds on drafting your system message, in this case, you may come up with something like this, where it says, you're an executive assistant that is monitoring the inbox of a high-level CEO of a huge company, and your goal is to read the email and draft an email reply on that basis. As the input, will share the email you're receiving, and your job will be to just output the email reply draft, making sure that it's concise, witty, and formatted in text format, easily pastable into an email inside of Gmail. Right, so as a high-level overview, it's a decent enough system message. Of course, we can then add constraints and we can add more rules to it. So if we want to do that, I'm just going to copy and paste it directly into ChatGPT and just say something like, improve this system. Since your ChatGPT or your LLM of choice knows a lot about you, it will actually be able to generate a pretty decent system prompt on your behalf, especially if you ask it to do that. But in the meantime, I'm just going to copy and paste this prompt, and I'm going to keep the system message fixed, because remember, it will not depend on what data is coming in every time. It's just giving it a high-level training on what the context is and how the AI agent should think. Now that we have the system message set up, the only thing that we would need in order to trigger this AI agent to run is the user message at the top over here. So for that, we can just click on the toggle, and you should be able to see that by default already we know that the input for this has been selected already from the Gmail trigger node. But if it wasn't already selected, we could just basically go through to the snippet and drag the snippet across over here into the prompt itself. So now that we have set up the system message, we're one step closer to actually putting this AI agent good use. But before that, at the very top, you should be able to see that it says source for prompt user message. Right now is connected chat trigger node. We want to change that to become define below instead. The reason for that is because this way we're able to actually feed it a bit more context for the user message. And in this case, we can say something like this. This is the email that we received. And then we can just basically drag the snippet, because the snippet is that email text that was grabbed from the email from our inbox, and we'll just drag it along over here. Worth noting that this should always be an expression key, because this field is dynamic. It depends on the previous node running well, so it can't be fixed. And in this case, after that, we can just click on execute step, and we should be able to see that it says executing node. And if we click on X in the top right-hand corner, and we then click on execute workflow, we can see how it works in real time. So it fetches on the left-hand side a new email from Gmail. And then after that, the AI agent, it relies on its system message and on the user message, on the simple memory and the Google Sheets knowledge. And then based on that, it generates an output for us. So in order for us to see the outputs, we can just double click into the AI agent. And on the right-hand side, we should be able to see the actual output. Worth noting that the N over here is just basically some spacing. So it shouldn't mean that the N will be present in the actual email output that we send out to someone. In this case, we can see that right now our AI agent wrote this reply where it says, message received, quick clarification, was this a test notification or did you intend to trigger an action? If you need something from me, state the desired outcome and deadline and I'll prioritize or delegate. If it was accidental, no action needed, resend when ready. So simply put, this reply is decent, but still you can tell that we have not trained this personal assistant well enough. In this case, I'm going to click on a toggle in the system message and say something like this. Make sure that each email is sent in first person and starts with a hey greeting followed by their first name. Make sure to space out each email so it is good to be sent right away. Aim to have every email under 30 words. And in this case, if we now click on execute step again, we can actually rerun this and see how much the user message change or the system message change has improved the output. A lot of the time, it's just making sure that we are prompting this correctly. So in this case, it now says, hey Tim, received n8n noted. Was this a test or do you need anything? Tell me the outcome and deadline and I'll prioritize. Right, I think this is decent. We can pin this data for the time being if we want to. And if we just take a quick step back and look at what we wanted to achieve inside of this automation, we wanted to read our email, we wanted to draft a reply to that email, and now we want to review the reply draft. In other words, we want to make sure that this reply draft makes sense before we actually go ahead and send it out to whoever we receive this email from. So for the time being, let's click on plus over here again, and on the right-hand side over here, you should be able to see the human review option. Right now, you might be thinking, why would you want a human review? The whole point of this course is to teach you to automate end-to-end everything. But the reality is, as you know from flirting with AI in the past, I'm sure, AI hallucinates, it makes errors, and especially with things like sending emails, a lot of the time you need to triple check and watch over the shoulder of your n8n agents to make sure that the email copy that it sends is word for word correct without the use of like M dashes or double hyphens or any other things that will make it super obvious that you're just automating a bunch of these processes. So in this case, just click into human review over here and you should be able to see a bunch of human review actions. So that means that you can connect any of these platforms that you see here, like WhatsApp, Telegram, Slack, email, Google Chat, Outlook, Teams, and some of the other ones over here, in order to perform a manual quality assurance check. And it could be as simple as us just connecting our Slack accounts. And then in this case, you will just ping us inside of our n8n automation Slack channel, for example, with something like this, where it says, hey, we received this email about your invoice of 220 rupees being overdue. Here is the reply that we want you to approve, right? And then on this basis, you just review the email that you received, you review the reply that's suggested, and then based on that, you can either decline to send that automated email reply, or you can approve it, in which case, of course, you'll then go ahead and send that email out. So for the purpose of the next step, I assume that you have access to a free Slack account, in which case all you would need to do is just type in human review over here as a node, and then you will select the human review node, go down to the Slack dropdown, and over here what we will do is we will start generating this message that can be sent to us via a Slack message to review this specific email reply. So for the purpose of this, the first thing we would need to do is just click on create a new credential. Over here, we can click on connect my account to the very bottom. And assuming that you have a Slack account, it will ask you to sign into your Slack account, which we can do over here by just selecting the relevant workspace. In my case, it will be B2B boosted. And as soon as that happens, we can then click on allow permissions. And you can see the connection is now successful. So we can close this other pop-up window. And this now gives us the option to send this email draft reply to review inside of Slack before we then send it out via Gmail back to whoever is waiting for a reply from us. So in this case, we have a bunch of different options. I will personally recommend that we send this message to a channel. So for the purpose of this, you can go into your own Slack account and find the channels part. And then inside of the channels part, you can then click on create a channel, and you can call this channel something like n8n testing 101 or something like that. And then you can click on next. You can select to be private because you don't want other people to see random tests that you're running, I guess. And at that point, that channel should have been created for you. And all you would need to do is just head back into this node. And then from this channel list over here, you should be able to find it in the list where if you by just typing in the word test, and you should be able to see n8n testing 101. And now you can start generating the email text that would look something like this that will go directly into this Slack channel. So the way that we'll proceed with this is we can just go back to the output of the AI agent. Let's have it in table view over here. And all we need to do is just drag it straight into the message. To make our lives a lot easier with the formatting, let's just click on the toggle over here and start drafting a message to something like, "Hi Tim, here is the email that we just received." And then we would need to now reference the previous node. So the node where the email was received. So we'll just drop a snippet from over there and we can drag it across over here. And then we can say, "Here is what we wanted to reply." And then we can now drag the output from the AI agent, which is the exact email reply that the AI agent drafted for us. Let me know if you want to go ahead with sending it out. And then a smiley emoji, right? And you can see in all the different formats over here, like, I mean, we may need to just see it in text formats on the right-hand side. This is what it would look like inside of the Slack channel. I would personally want to space it out a bit so it looks a bit less awkward. And you can also use the greater than and the less than sign on your keyboard in order to highlight the fields that you would like to look in bold inside of the message. So if we just do that, and if we just click on X over here, we can now just select the response type to be approval. And at the very bottom where it says approval options, give an option to approve. Over here, just scroll down to approve only and change that to approve and disapprove, right? And that way you can have two different logic trees whereby if this email reply is approved, we'll send it. If not, we can do something else with the data. So over here, we can then click on execute step. And after we click on execute step, we should go back to our newly created Slack channel, which is called something tech. We should be able to see that this has just arrived, and we can see here's the email we just received. How are you? Best wishes. And then it says, "Hey, this is the reply." And then let me know if you want to go ahead with sending this out. And if we click on approve, it will basically trigger the rest of the workflow to run. So now that I have clicked on approve, it basically opens a separate pop-up to say that this has been recorded inside of n8n. And over here, we can see approved is now true. So we can pin this and proceed with the next steps. Worth noting for the time being, though, that the formatting over here was really, really bad. And as you could tell, it was not aesthetically nice to look at. So for the purpose of this, I very much, instead of like me trying to format this properly, I'd rather just go to my best friend, ChatGPT, copy and paste it here, and say something like this. The input is the notification text that I'm adding into the Slack node inside of n8n. Format this nicely for me so that it has emojis, some text in bold, and so that it formats really nicely, and it really makes my day when I read this notification when it comes into Slack. And I'm basically copying and pasting the actual, like the text that was there originally, and let's have a look what it comes up with. So now it basically comes up with this text over here instead. And now we can basically copy and paste this text back over here. And you can see it didn't preserve the actual trigger and the JSON output. So in this case, if we look at the HTML text, it would look like this. The markdown will look like this. And if we click on X over here, we should now be able to click on execute step again. And for that, we may need to unpin and test as it says over here. And again, this data will now be resent into our Slack channel. And you can see this time the formatting has improved. It's a lot better. It already says like, "Hi Tim, how are you? Best wishes, blah, blah, blah." You know, all of this stuff I think is pretty good. And it's a lot nicer to read this time. So guys, really quickly, whenever you see that your messages are formatted like this and they're not exactly beautified and they basically don't work in HTML formats over here, in that case, just go back to your ChatGPT and just ask it to format so it's compatible with this specific platform. So in this, as I came to find out the hard way, Slack uses the Slack Markdown instead of HTML, which is basically just another way to say format the same output using the Slack compatible text formats. And then that way, ChatGPT will basically give us the formatting, which will automatically look a lot better inside of. So all we need to do is just copy the code from over here, go into n8n and just type it in over here. And you can see this is what it would look like. And you should be able to see now, if we click on execute step after going through all of this drama with formatting, finally, for once, this looks absolutely stunning. So it says new email received, hi Tim, have planned reply, ready to send, just say the word, I'll send it out. And then obviously you don't say a word here, spoiler alert, you just click on approve. And as soon as you click on approve with it, we can then proceed with the next. So that's just like a quick formatting lesson for myself more than anything, just to make sure that I remember and that we remember remember that each platform will have a different messaging style. So that way, just use ChatGPT so that you don't need to just go and, type in all these stars and all these other characters that I didn't even know existed on my keyboard. And in this case, let's pin the data for future reference and crack on with the workflow.
Okay, it's now about time that we reflect upon what we have built inside of this AI agent. And as you can see on the left-hand side, the trigger node has already been set up. The data has been pinned throughout this workflow, meaning that we're not wasting any execution credits throughout. And the AI agent has been connected to the OpenAI chat model, Simple Memory, and Google Sheets. More than that, the system prompt and the user prompt has already been set up. And we even have a human in the loop human review step inside of n8n, which enables us to send a message over here. Worth noting, the example, if we click on approve, we want it to automatically trigger the sending of an email. If that's the kind of rule that we want to set, what we need to go ahead and do now is click on plus over here and type in if. And this will mean that we can use the n8n if node. And if we click into it over here, we should be able to see that we're able to set different conditions. And if we just click out of this node, you should be able to see, for example, right now, by default, it's set to this. So if send a message, for instance, in this case, was approved, then we follow with one action. But if it's not approved and that's false, then we trigger another action, just as an example, right? So to configure this properly, we can double tap into the if node, and then we can drag across the output from the previous node, which is the Slack message status. And this is whatever we basically replied to that Slack message, whether we approved it or we declined it. And in this case, I'm just going to select Boolean and say is true, because what this will basically do is it will create an option for us whereby if this approved status is true, then we basically can do something with the data. For the time being, I'm going to convert type to where required. Just make sure that this is ticked so we don't get an error. And I'll explain and go back to this in a couple of minutes, just so that we're on the same page and so we understand this. More than that, inside of the node, we can rename the node. So for example, email reply approval. In this case, if the emailed reply approval is true, in other words, we ticked that box to say approve, and in that case, we can now click on execute step. But we can see that there is a new path that developed at the very top over here, where we have one item, meaning that as soon as we approve the data over here, you automatically will be pushed into this funnel. But alternatively, if we double click over here and we add another condition and we drag this value across again and set an or condition and is equal to false, then that will create a separate condition altogether. So in that case, we can see one item at the top, one item at the bottom. I hope that makes sense up to this point. And the main idea now is if the email was approved, we can then click on a plus over here and we can then go back the Gmail node, find the send a message node, and we can now go to the AI agent step, drag the output from there, and just copy and paste it into the email reply over here. For the purpose of this, we can use HTML because I think that should be absolutely fine. We would need to go back to the trigger node in order to pull the actual email address of the person from who we received the email in the first place. So it will be the from column. And we can drag it into the to parts over here. And then more than that, we can then keep the subject line over here just so that we don't confuse the recipient of the email and we just keep the subject line exactly the same. And of course, the key for this to work is for us to connect our own Gmail account to the top. So I'm going to select that and then click on execute step. And we should be able to see that that email was sent. And again, before you double check that, just pin this step so that we save the data. We can now go into the executions and we can see that the step succeeded. We could even click into this node to see what happened. We can see the table view over here, but the best check for this will be to just head into our Gmail account and see it for how. So in this case, I'm logging into my account. We can see the reply over here. n8n noted. Was this a test? Did you need anything? Tell me the outcome. And that's basically that. The only thing that stands out here is that the formatting is not correct. In which case, we can just go back to the editor view. We can go back to the send a message node. And then over here, we can select the email type to be text. And that way, we can then click on the toggle over here to expand it. And you can see this formatting should be better now. So we can basically click on execute step again and see if the formatting improves. So you can see it's now been executed once again. Another email came in, but this time it's formatted way, way better. So that's essentially how you would go about building a very, very simple AI agent. Of course, there are also a lot of tiny little details that will make this workflow a lot better, meaning that even the quality of email replies improves by a long way. But the main thing towards the end of creating any sort of workflow like this is to make sure that you give it a name. So I'll just call this flow number 2. I'll call it something like flow number 2, email replying by AI agents. Typically, I would click on this
icon in the bottom left hand corner which says tidy up. It looks like a little brush, so if you click on that, it just makes it nicer to look at. And more than that, I'm now going to click into each one of these nodes and at the same time press space on my keyboard so I can rename it. And then I'm going to rename every node. For example, Slack approval sent, in this case, email reply approval, and then I'll just say for this one something like email reply sent. Of course, if we wanted to add a separate condition here for where the email reply approval status was false, whereby we didn't give AI permission to then go and reply to that email, in that case, we may want to set a separate thing. For example, we may want to choose HubSpot and then create the task for ourselves or something of that sort. But for the time being, I'm just going to kill it over here because I don't really want to create task in HubSpot or anything of that sort for this stage. And one other thing to keep in mind is that as a final step before we launch any workflow live, what we need to do is just drag across all of the nodes, click on P at the same time on your keyboard, and that way you should be able to unpin all of the data. And then afterwards, to just triple check and to do your final quality assurance check, you can click on execute workflow again, and you should be able to now see how a workflow flows end to end with all of the data. So let's take a look. Because up to this point, we only tested it node by node. We didn't test it as a whole. So this will really be the make or break moment. We might get an error somewhere, in which case we'll have to fix it. But for the time being, you can see it's just circling across a bunch of nodes. It's performing as well as it needs to. By the time that it reaches the Slack approval mode, of course, it just means that you would have been pinged on Slack already. So just head into your Slack, click, and that should then trigger the rest of the workflow. And then finally, at the very end over here, you should be able to see that now an email was sent. Again, if you are at all curious if it was actually sent, you can either go into your executions over here and see it for yourself, or you can head into your inbox. You can see in this case that this was actually an email that we sent out. One final thing from me, there are a couple of little buttons that you can press in order to help you out with this workflow a lot. The first button that I absolutely adore is the sticky note button on the right hand side over here. So if you click on add sticky note, you can then basically drag the sticky notes typically on the left of the AI agent that we've just built out. So in this case, we can say something like workflow 1, we can tell it what the trigger is, what the action is, and so on. And if you don't want to type out step by step exactly everything that you built out in this workflow, one thing that you can do is click on the 3 dots in the top right hand corner and then select download. And in that case, you will download the JSON of this AI agent. And what you can do is then just put this into ChatGPT and say, turn this JSON into a markdown sticky note text that I can paste to document the flow. And what this will basically do is it will just create the text for this sticky note, because you can see it says over here, you can style it with Markdown, and Markdown is a style of formatting which is compatible with this node over here. So for example, like if you type it like this, it's just plain text, but the actual Markdown sticky note format over here will be far, far better. So in this case, that's typically how I would document the workflows, where I just basically feed it the JSON. And you can think of JSON like the building blocks behind this n8n flow on the back end. So all we need to do is just import the JSON into ChatGPT, and it will create a nice summary like this. And then we'll just add it on the right-hand side over here. And now voila, you've got the full documentation of this workflow, which is super, super seamless. Like anyone on your team should be able to understand what's going on here. And you can even drag it across. So it's something like this. Worth noting, as I probably pointed out earlier in the video as well, if you are stuck at any point in the workflow, I also really like to use the sticky notes for that purpose. So for example, if you're stuck on this email reply sent node, just put it over this node over here and then triple click into it and just say something like stuck with like a couple of exclamation marks. And then you can change the color to, let's say, red or pink or whatever random color you want to change it to. And then that way, next time that you're inside of this AI workflow or inside of this AI agent, you know where you need to pick up the pieces, where you need to tidy up the things that are giving you errors or bugs. And that's the best way to go and troubleshoot after that. And last but not least, regarding this AI agent, why would it not work right now for us? And yes, as I asked this question, I realized that you can't really answer through the screen just yet. So the reason for that is because we still have not clicked on publish. So as soon as we click on publish here and click on publish again, we should be able to see that now that it's published, we should have it nice and operational. If you click on unpublish, of course, it will be unpublished all over again. So for that reason, after we built it out and after we clicked on execute workflow, you would not be live and operational until we click publish. Just a couple of quick tips on building any sort of AI workflows. The first tip is whenever you're building any workflows, sometimes you may want to disconnect one of the nodes just to play around with it on its own. And in those times, I recommend for you to remove the link between two nodes. So in that case, you just click on delete between the two nodes, and then you can drag it across somewhere else so it's not distracting the rest of the workflow. But at the same time, just left click into it and you can click on deactivate. And that way, this node will not be confusing or distracting the rest of the workflow. And it will also mean that any errors in this node will not cause errors in the rest of the workflow for the time being. And then after you fix this node or you're ready to integrate it back into the workflow, just left click on it again, click on activate, and then you could just drag this arrow to connect the nodes back up again. And that's just another niche little tip that I would have for you when it comes to just practicing with building out your first few n8n workflows. If you are ever stuck inside of n8n, one thing that I would very much advise is that in the top right hand corner you have n8n AI. So if you click over here for a second, then you say something like, I am stuck in this flow, help. A lot of the time you will give you either some tips over here if you give it some context, or alternatively you can ask it questions and it will look up millions of different data points and questions and answers that it has answered to previous people trying to automate things inside of n8n. So I very much recommend, if you ever get stuck inside of n8n, just play around with the n8n AI button, which is right now at the time of me recording this on the right hand side of the screen, and then it can either help you build stuff if you choose the build option, or you can just simply ask it questions. Of course, if you click on build, AI will be able to actually help you build out the workflows, which is perhaps a topic that I can cover in a separate video, assuming that I'm lucky enough to count you in as a subscriber. So make sure to double check that you're subscribed to this channel, like this video if you watch this far, and for the time being, let's crack on with the rest of this. One thing that I cannot stress enough when it comes to n8n, just like any other fancy AI or automation tool on the market, before you jump into n8n itself, you need to first of all understand the trigger. You need to secondly understand the actions that you want to perform, aka what you want to do inside of an n8n workflow. Based on that, you can choose between building an AI workflow or an AI agent, as we already discussed. And after you've decided what you're going to do and what kind of automation you will build, only then you need to understand what nodes you will be choosing to build out this automation for yourself. After those things are confirmed, it's then a matter of you entering n8n and building out the workflow or AI agent completely from scratch. But please don't enter n8n and just try to play around with different nodes, because that will cause a lot of confusion, you getting overwhelmed. You might even start wasting some execution credits, and before you know it, you will probably give up on n8n in the process.
Now we have already built an AI workflow completely from scratch, it's about time that we cover one of the most important features inside of n8n that you need to know inside out to make sure that you start off every single AI workflow correctly. And the thing that we'll be talking about now is every single trigger inside of n8n. Needless to say, you cannot build an AI agent or an AI workflow if you have not selected the right trigger. And just a quick reminder, the trigger is just a node that starts a workflow. As you can see on my screen right now, if you head over to n8n and click on create workflow in the top right hand corner, as we talked about this already, if you click on add first step, you will see all the different triggers listed on the right hand side. So let's go through them one by one. The first trigger that you see is a manual trigger. And the way that the manual trigger works is very, very simple. All you need to do is just click on trigger manually and then just add a node after it. So let's just imagine for a second that we're going to have an n8n form submission. So let's say after it, all we do is we just send an email alerting us of a new client. Then in that case, all we would need to do in order to trigger the consequent steps inside of this specific workflow, all we would need to do is just click on this trigger and automatically you will trigger the workflow to run. So essentially the first trigger that we just talked about is just a manual trigger whereby you just have to press it and that will trigger the workflow to run. That's for the manual trigger is for semi-automated workflows whereby you just want to log into n8n, only use this specific workflow sporadically, meaning that you don't use it that often. And basically you just come in, click the button and it will execute the rest of the workflow. The second type of triggers that I want to talk about now is the on app event trigger. So the way that it works is we just need to know in which specific app or tool the trigger occurs in. So for example, if your trigger is a Google Sheet having a new row added to it, all we would need to do is just type in Google Sheets, and over here you should be able to see the 3 triggers that are available for Google Sheets. The same thing applies across other platforms. So for example, if you want to see a new form submission inside of HubSpot, we can just click into HubSpot and we can see that they have all sorts of triggers for HubSpot as well. So just in case, whenever you are ideating and thinking about what the right trigger is,
you can actually go on the right hand side over here and just click on ask. And based on that, you can just type in your use case and say something like, I want to find a trigger for a workflow where someone submits a website form on my Webflow website. What should the trigger be? And in that case, this n8n AI model should be able to basically search all the different documentations, look for answers within the n8n community, and come back to you saying, hey, you can have a Webflow trigger. You can actually configure it like this, and here's how you basically set it up. So I very much recommend, if you're stuck on this, that in the top right hand corner you have the n8n AI button. But moving on, apart from that, you also have on a schedule trigger, and the way that it works is quite simple. After you click into it, you can set a trigger interval, so how often specific workflow will run. Now, most commonly, you will be running things on a daily or weekly basis, or maybe on a monthly basis. Don't do it hourly, don't do it minute by minute, because you will spend a lot of execution credits. And you can just basically set this up really quickly over here and say you want to do it once every Sunday at midnight. You can click on execute step, and then it will execute the rest of the workflow, this time going forward. Another option for you will also be to run a workflow on a webhook call. So this one is very straightforward. All you would need to do is just click on webhook call, and it will generate a webhook URL over here at the top of the screen. And you will have two different types of URLs. So the first URL is the test URL, which is the one for testing purposes when we're just building out the workflow. And then the production URL is the real thing after the workflow has been published and is live. All right, really quickly, let's just cover what n8n webhooks are actually all about. Simply put, a webhook is just a special URL link that starts your automation when something happens. You will only ever need to use webhooks inside of n8n when you are sending data from another platform into n8n. So let's take as an example, you heading into your Instantly accounts, which you may use for email automation. And in their case, if you head over to settings and you head it over into the integrations tab, you should be able to see webhooks on the left-hand side. In that case, you may have an option within external platforms to add a webhook, and it will always ask you for a webhook URL. So in this case, all you would need to do is you would need to copy and paste the webhook URL from n8n, drop it inside of Instantly or any other tool where you're trying to send the data from, and you will just copy and paste the webhook URL here. You will then want to select what kind of data you want to be sent to that webhook. So in this case, we can send positive replies, we can send these unsubscribing, and all of these other notifications. And then after that, we can select the target campaigns. So I'm going to select all campaigns, and then you can click on add webhook. And what this will mean is that as soon as you set this up, any data that comes in to Instantly from now on, that comes from any of these campaigns, it will automatically be pushed into the webhook inside of n8n. And it's as simple as that. All it requires is you just to have the URL link ready. And essentially, after you copy and paste this webhook URL to whatever platform that you're sending the data from, it will automatically then send the data into this n8n flow. So for this, we can then click on listen for test events. And whenever there is an update to send, you should be able to see that the data will be sent inside of the workflow. Moving on, we also have some other cool triggers. For example, the form submission trigger. I think we covered this earlier in the video, but it's basically as soon as a form is submitted, this will automatically trigger the rest of the workflow. So in this case, if we create a quick website inquiry form and we only ask for the email address of the person that's filling in the form, as soon as we fill this in right now, we should be able to see that then the rest of the workflow can run afterwards as soon as this form is submitted as the trigger. Another thing to keep in mind is we can also communicate inside of n8n with other workflows and other AI agents. So in this case, you have another trigger which can be executed by another workflow. So if you click on when executed by another workflow over here, you should be able to double click into it and then select which other workflows data you want to trigger the running of this specific workflow. This is more kind of intermediate advanced territory. I'm not going to cover this in more detail, but if you want me to cover this kind of things, you'll find it inside of my new Unlock n8n course, which will be the top link in the description down below. The one super popular trigger that 90% of AI agents rely on is this on-chat message trigger. So in this case, if we click into it, we should be able to see that the trigger for the workflow will be a new chat message being received. So in this case, we can just click on test chat. And as soon as we input something like, how are you? This chat message will then trigger the running of all the consequent nodes after the initial trigger over here. These are the most mainstream triggers inside of n8n that you need to know of already. Of course, there are some more niche ones like when running evaluation and some other triggers that you may need to know. But for the time being, if you're just watching a beginner tutorial, you don't really need to worry about any other triggers. In the next phase of the video, I want to cover
cover the complex stuff inside of n8n, and I'm going to try to simplify it and break it down so simply that hopefully you will overcome that fear of entering n8n next time. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that inside of n8n, you are actually able to have more than one trigger in one specific workflow. What I mean by that is you can have a workflow similar to the one that you can see on my screen right now, whereby the workflow has more than one part to it. So in part 1, we have one trigger. In part 2, we have another trigger. In part 3, we have another trigger, and so on and so on. The main idea behind this is that every trigger has to be different. So you cannot repeat the same trigger more than once inside of one automation, inside of one workflow like this one. And the beauty of n8n is that you can visualize this so that, for example, in this case where we are creating a content repurposing engine inside of n8n in this workflow, all of these are interlinked. So as soon as part 1 finishes, this triggers the running of part 2, and then as soon as this finishes, it triggers running of part 3. But worth noting that you need to get quite creative with the triggers. So in this case, for example, we would need to click this manually in order to run the first flow. Then the second flow will start automatically, and then the third flow will be scheduled to run. So just make sure whenever you're building out any n8n workflows, you're not duplicating the same trigger more than once. And if you do want to break down an automation into 3 or 4 different parts, in that case, you can keep them all inside of one flow like this one. But just make sure to multi-select the nodes and just click on deactivate the nodes when you're building new parts of the flow so that you can test parts of the flow in isolation. Now, another thing that confuses a lot of new n8n users is how to handle different types of files. So in this case, I just created a quick form submission whereby the only thing that we need to do is upload a PDF file. So in this case, let's say I just upload a random file over here and click on submit. This will then trigger the running of the workflow, right? One thing that you will find with any sort of file uploads, they will not be visible inside of the schema, table, or JSON view. However, they will not be that useful in the schema, table, or JSON view, but they will always be visible and in the right format in the binary view. So if you go in the binary view, you can straight away download the file and you can see it over here. Now guys, if you want to move faster inside of n8n, I've put together an entire n8n shortcuts guide, which contains every single n8n shortcut that I know. And as you can see on your screen right now, they include shortcuts both for Mac users and for PC users, meaning that you can learn all sorts of funky shortcuts. For example, there are a couple of shortcuts such as clicking tab on your keyboard, which automatically opens up the panel with all the different nodes on the right hand side, and little things like selecting the actual node and clicking on space in order to rename that node instantly. In total, there are about 30 different shortcuts, which I very much recommend for you to check out so that you can get a lot more efficient and a lot faster inside of n8n. So if you want to take me up on that, just go and click that top link in the description down below. And in that guide, not only will you get the actual shortcuts, you also get this entire course, the slides that I go through throughout this course as well, and any other freebies that I mentioned throughout this video, such as that website that enables you to create limitless amounts of free trial accounts just through creating a temporary burner email address. Anyways, go click on that guide, top link in the description down below, and let's crack on with the video. Now I want to explain what confuses pretty much everyone when they get started with using n8n. And you've probably guessed it already, we're going to be talking about data field types. Don't worry, it's a lot simpler than it sounds. And if you think about it, everything inside of n8n is basically just data. And to oversimplify this, the data can come in different shapes. So just think about it as containers. Different containers will hold data in different ways. So let's just jump into a quick n8n flow and click on add first step and type in the set node, otherwise known as the edit fields node over here. And we should be able to see, if you click on add field, over here, you're able to add 5 different types of data. So if we click onto the string over here, we should be able to see all the different types of data that are most common inside n8n. So the first type of data is string data. And string basically just means text. And text just means words. So for example, if the field name is like first name and the value is Tim, and if I click on execute step, you should see on the right hand side, it will say first name is Tim. In technical terms, this will be known as a string. But again, I know this is common sense up to this point. It gets trickier after you get into the more complicated data field types. Next up, if we click on the drop down here, we should be able to see the number option, And in this case, for example, if we're looking for something like age or anything else that's numeric, of course, that will be a number. So for example, if my age is 24, and I click on execute step, you should be able to see 24. Worth noting that if you ever store a number as text, for example, when you're referencing the index or the postcode or something like that, and by accident is just full of numbers and it's stored as text, your n8n workflow may give you an error message. So if you ever get an error because of data field types, just double check that the data field type is text for any sort of text inputs, and the data field type is numbers for any type of numeric inputs. Now, where things get a tiny bit more complex is if we switch the toggle over to Boolean, and essentially it just means true or false. So for example, let's assume that we have a list of people and we want to see if they're subscribed to a newsletter. So in this case, I could say subscribe to Tim's newsletter ? And in this case, I can select only true or false values. And then again now, if I click on execute step, you should be able to see that the node is executed successfully. Alright, now, chances are you might find this a bit trickier because we're going to step it up a gear, and this time we're going to talk about the object data fields type. So again, if we click inside of n8n over here, we navigate over to the object. You should be able to see this square looking box thing. And the best way to think about it, an object is just a group of related information. Now, what do I mean by that? Think about it like a folder. In the folder, you will have a bunch of labeled items. So for example, let's say I create a folder about myself. My first name could be Tim, my age could be 24, the city where I'm from could be London, and all of these parameters will all form one object. So let's imagine for a second that those three things that I just mentioned, my name, my age, and the city, are all one object. In that case, we can head into ChatGPT and say, turn this info about myself into an object field in the object node in n8n, and then I can go ahead and copy and paste my name, the age, and the city, and as soon as I click on enter, I don't even need to use any fancy custom GPT. All I need to do is just ask the free ChatGPT version for this, and straight away it will turn this into a JSON string of data that looks something like this. You will notice that inside of this object field, everything is wrapped around these curly brackets around the outside. Each value is in quotation marks. So for example, the name is in quotation marks, the age is in quotation marks, the city is in quotation marks, and the key behind each one of those values. So for example, in this case, remember that it's a value key pair whereby the value is name, the key is Tim in this case, right? Every key is wrapped around a quotation mark, and each part of that object is also split up by a comma. So in that case, all we need to do is just copy this and go back into the n8n node, and over here where it says object, we can just remove the false text and copy and paste all of this object data. If we want to see it better, we can click on the toggle here as well, and we can see it for ourselves. And in this case, we can rename the object to person info, and we can click on execute step, and we should be able to see that all of that information from that folder inside of the object has now been split into three different variables, so age, city, and name. So in most cases, we will use this set edit fields node in order to manually map the data into the right formats for us before we start any sort of AI workflow or we build out any sort of AI agent inside of n8n. Again, for the purpose of this, it could get tedious with remembering the curly brackets, remembering the quotation marks and all of that stuff. However, I very much recommend that you rely on ChatGPT in order to help you out with actually formatting the data like this. And then after that, you can click on execute step and you can see the data in table formats and schema formats and JSON formats. And always remember to pin the data, because as I mentioned a million times throughout this course already, this will mean that we're saving any execution credits and we will always have test data to play around with rather than having to refill the forms or resubmit information in order to trigger the workflow. And finally, there is the fifth data field type, which will be known as the array. And an array is basically just a list. That's it, just a list of things. For example, my hobbies are football, podcasts, cooking. That's an array. If you have multiple values in one field, it's usually going to be an array. So for example, if you have multiple email addresses, you have multiple products, you have multiple tags, you have multiple first names, multiple LinkedIn profiles, whatever it is, that's just going to all be in one array because that's the best place to store that kind of list. So in this case, let's imagine that we have three of my email addresses, one email address for my agency business B2B Boosted, another one for my Clay course, Unlock Clay, and another one for my n8n course, which is the Unlock n8n course. In that case, all I can do with those three email addresses is copy and paste them into ChatGPT and say something like, turn this data into an array for the n8n node. And in that case, after I click on enter, I should be able to see that within just a couple of seconds, ChatGPT basically outputs these 3 email addresses in the right format for me. And again, if you want to remember this for future reference, you'll be wrapped around the square brackets. You'll also have quotation marks for each one of the email addresses, all separated by a comma. So in that case, all I need to do is copy this back into n8n. And then in this case, I'm just going to remove the previous text, select array, and then this time I can call this email addresses, and then click on execute stack. And one final thing that you absolutely need to know about when it comes to data field types is that if you click typically on the add option button or somewhere underneath the edit fields node over here, you should be able to see the option that it gives you to ignore type conversion errors. Let me just quickly explain what this actually means, because this will spare you a lot of bugs, a lot of errors in any of the workflows that you build out. And simply put, when n8n processes data, it sometimes tries to convert one type of data into another type of data. So for example, turning text into a number, turning true into a boolean, or just simply converting a value into a different format. Now, usually, if n8n tries to convert the data and it fails, the workflow will stop and it will give you an error message. And that will be known as a type conversion error. So for example, let's say a field says 24, but in text format, in writing, and n8n is expecting to see a number like 24 in number format. It can't convert that data for you, so it throws an error at you instead. So essentially, if you go into n8n and you click on this add option button and click on ignore type conversion errors, you're basically just telling n8n if something can't convert from one data field type to another properly, don't break the workflow, don't give me the errors, just continue the workflow. So instead of stopping everything and causing you the trauma and giving you the error message, it will just crack on and continue with the rest of the nodes as a part of the workflow. So I very much recommend that you're cautious of when you use this ignore type conversion errors, when you switch this toggle on, but you probably should be using it when you're dealing with a lot of messy incoming data, which may require conversion from text to numbers, when some fields are already empty in the inputted data. So for example, if you have a form submission where some of the form submissions are completely empty, or where some values may not match the expected formats. So in cases when you're processing 100 leads through an n8n flow and 10 of them have some weird formatting or empty fields, you don't want the rest of the workflow to stop because of that. So that's when you would typically have to just make sure that this ignore type conversion error is switched on. Now you might be thinking, okay, cool, why did you bother just spending the last 5 minutes teaching me about data field types? Isn't it better to just spend time building the workflows and getting your hands dirty with it? And you're kind of right if you're thinking that. However, if you don't understand the shape of the data, your automation will break. So if something is actually an array and you treat it like a string text data field type, it won't work. So whenever something isn't working, and whenever you do see an error message about data field types, just reference this part of the video and the chances are you will understand that you probably mismatched one of the data field types. And one final pro tip. If you ever see a bunch of JSON data and it looks really intimidating and complex and you don't really understand what the hell is going on, so for example, if I go into this Atify store over here and I go into the Instagram scraper, and if I click into the API details and I see all of this random text over here, all I recommend you do is that you find the JSON data, which explains the inputs or the outputs or whatever it is, copy them to clipboard, go into ChatGPT and just type in, explain this JSON to me, and then copy and paste the actual JSON text. And then on that basis, it will basically just explain to you what that JSON text is all about. So in this case, it will give you like a field by field explanation. So you can then understand what the parent data is, what the direct URLs are, and so on. And that way, typically, you will get unstuck the fastest. Alright guys, in the next 2 minutes of this video, I'm going to show you how you can connect n8n to any external API in under 1 minute without being technical and without having to rely on manually fitting in any sort of headers, value pairs, or any of that boring stuff. So essentially, all we need to do is navigate over to n8n, click on the plus button, and as you would probably know by now, if you type in HTTP request,
This is typically the node inside of n8n that you would use in order to connect to any other external platforms that do not have a native integration with n8n already. At that point, you should just click into HTTP request and look for this import curl button at the top of the node. So just click into that button and just be prepared to paste the curl command here, where you can see the text on my screen right now. The way that it works is all you need to do is head over into the API documentation page of any random API that you can think of. So in this case, I'm on the freepublicapis.com website. And let's say I'm going to look for the exchange rate API or the air quality index API as an example here. All I'm going to do is just copy all of the information from this page, go into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to turn this API info into a curl format for me to paste into the HTTP node inside n8n. Or alternatively, if you don't want to type that in and it sounds like it's a lot of text to type in, all I'm going to say is turn this into a curl format. And I'm going to copy and paste all that information I just grabbed directly from that API documentation page. In this case, it will now give you the curl format at the bottom over here. So all I'm going to do is just copy it over here, paste the curl, click on import. You should be able to see straight away, you will add the API keys, you will add the IP, you will add any sorts of URL endpoints or anything of that sort. So you don't really need to understand the techie side of it. And then after that, you can click on execute step and you should be able to see that this request works successfully. And you can see the request on the right in schema table and JSON view. So that's pretty much that. All you need to do is just make sure that you find the right API documentation page, copy and paste the API documentation page information into ChatGPT, and then copy and paste all the curl information into the import curl section over here. And that's as simple as that. Connect to any third-party API, which does not have a native connection with n8n, in just a couple of seconds. And if you are as mind blown as I expect you to be at this point in this video, make sure to like this video and leave a nice comment down below and consider subscribing to this channel so that you can stay on top of tools like n8n, clay.com, Claude Code, and all that fun stuff. So that's basically that. You know how to connect to any external API using the HTTP request inside of n8n.
Okay guys, in this part of the course, let's talk about how you can go about scoping and selling automations related services. I want to break down this section into 3 parts. The first part will cover how you can go about getting new clients for who you can automate their existing systems and processes. The second thing that I want to cover is how you can onboard such clients. And then the third thing finally is how you can then go about delivering automations related services in a templated and a slightly less chaotic than usual manner. So starting off with client acquisition, and just before we jump into this, everything that I'm about to share is based on my experience of running my own agency that has implemented clay.com for over 50 clients and has previously implemented all sorts of other random tools ranging from n8n to Zapier to n8n. And my intention with this is just to share what worked for me in the past, so take it with a pinch of salt. And if something sounds counterintuitive, then by all means try it out. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, because every business is different, every context is different. And I don't really need to give this disclaimer, but I just thought to be 100% transparent with you here. So let's just jump into the first part where we'll talk about client acquisition. In my opinion, the number one most important thing in order to attract the right clients is for you to only target people that are already solution aware. And right now, I'll be showing you 3 ways how you can go about finding people that are solution aware in the first place. So first of all, you may have seen me reference this tool called Scrapely. Their website is scrapely.io, and I'm not associated with them in any way, shape, or form. But essentially, all it is a tool which enables you to scrape anyone that follows a specific company on LinkedIn. So in this case, if you head over to competitors followers on the left side of the panel, and if you go into your Google search and you type in n8n LinkedIn company page, we can now find n8n's LinkedIn company page. We can see over here they have 289,000 people that follow the company. We can copy and paste the actual URL of their company page into Scrapely. And if we paste it over here, we can then give this a name, followers of n8n, and say we want to scrape 10,000 followers for the purpose of this, and now basically that. We can then click on continue, and we can see that a list of 10,000 people that are solution aware, they already heard of n8n and follow n8n, very likely because they see the potential of this tool and they see the value of no-code, low-code AI automations. In this case, a list of just 10,000 people that follow this page will only cost us $42. Of course, if you go into a platform like Apify, you can also type in LinkedIn company followers, and you can see a bunch of different actors, aka scrapers, that you can use in order to scrape a bunch of followers. So in this case, you can see this one will cost you $25 a month, but it basically gives you probably like tens of thousands of followers scrapes, and it's super simple to use. So in this case, I can just click on try for free, log into my Apify account, and over here, all I need to do is just copy and paste the company ID. So in this case, I can just copy and paste this, and then click on start at the top of the screen, and that way I'll be able to scrape anyone that follows n8n on LinkedIn already. Now, let me clarify a couple of things here. Yes, it's not going to be 100% free. And a lot of the time I get comments underneath videos like this one where people are saying, hey, but I have zero budgets. I don't want to spend anything on finding the right leads. And I don't think it's the right kind of mindset, because at the end of the day, if you're going to charge people hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars on implementing automations, it will literally cost you maybe $100 in total to pull up a good list of people, which will be a far higher quality lead list than the one that other random freelancers are spending $0 on otherwise. So take this with a pinch of salt, but I honestly recommend that you budget at least $20, maybe $50 on just sourcing the right lead list. And one way that you could do that is either using a tool like Scrapely or using Apify and just scraping the followers of a specific company. In this case, if you scrape the followers of n8n, Zapier, Make.com, you will come across folks that are already solution aware. They already know that such product exists, but a lot of the time, the biggest challenge for them is that they don't have the time to scope and actually build those automations themselves. And that's when you can come into the picture. Now, the second way that you can find solution aware buyers is inside of Slack communities or Discord communities. For the purpose of this, I'll be giving away my Slack community scraper SOP and video, which walks you through how you can scrape any Slack community using just one simple Chrome extension. And in this case, all you need to do is head into ChatGPT and type in something like this. Find me and Alcor, a Slack community where a bunch of agency owners hang out, where they may need n8n automations. I'll put the community link and nothing else. And in this case, you can just head into free communities like this one. So this one is called growyouragency.group. And in this case, ChatGPT just referenced this specific community, which is called the CRO Growth Hacks, and CRO stands for Chief Revenue Officers. And very likely that this specific Slack community attracts a bunch of people that C-level, that lead revenue teams, and chances are, if they lead a revenue team, they have a bunch of processes that they're already performing manually. So for the purpose of this, all you need to do is just click on join over here, and you should be able to see that now it will ask create an account with Slack, sign in. And from that point onwards, you can actually use this Slack SOP guide with a video, which will be top link in the description down below, where I give away all the resources for this video. And it will show you exactly what Chrome extension you need to download and how you can actually go about scraping all of these community members, how you can then go about enriching them and reaching out to them via cold outreach. So if you want to check that out, go grab it, top link in the description down below. But essentially what I'm trying to do here is just reinforce that there are so many different ways that you can go about finding people who are already solution aware in the first place. Okay, and moving on, a lot of the time you may be wondering who actually engages with posts about n8n, because chances are if they engage with posts about n8n, they already understand the benefits of the platform, but again, they may not have the time to actually build out a lot of the n8n flows that they know they should probably have running for their business already. So for the purpose of this demo, I'll be using this test account inside of a tool called Trigify. If you're not sure about what Trigify is basically a social listening tool for modern GTM teams. In this case, what we need to do is head over into the keyword engagement tab over here and type in n8n as an example. If you filter for the last 30 days, you will be able to see every single person that has engaged with this keyword over the last 30 days on LinkedIn. So if we click on the toggle at the top of the screen over here, and if we scroll down, we should be able to see there are over 2,500 people in the last 7 days that have engaged with this keyword, and you can filter them based on location. So in this case, I assume most of us would be aspiring to sell into the American market. And we can then even go a step further and filter based on the desired job titles, locations, company sizes, industries, number of followers that these individuals have. And based on that, we should have a pretty good lead list of people that are already n8n aware, and chances are there may be in the market for someone to actually go and implement a couple of n8n workflows for them. And of course, by the end of this process, you will end up with having quite a large lead list of people that you can go after using this specific trigger. And even in the opening line of the email, you could say something like,
oh hey, I noticed that you engage with a bunch of content about n8n. Just curious, are you already actively building out workflows, or do you have any processes in mind that you're looking to automate inside of your business? And I know that this may sound a bit too generic to you, but I've used similar email templates before with zero personalization, and all I'm basically pitching in a lot of cases is just a free automation on me in return for 30 minutes of the time on a quick scoping call with a prospect. And you will be surprised how many people actually give you the opportunity to do this, because again, they don't have the time in order to actually build out these n8n flows for themselves. And more than that, inside of Trigify specifically, you can grab a 2-week free trial and actually get an over 20% discount using code TIM20 at checkout, by the way, in case if you're wondering, which is an exclusive discount for all of my Unlock Clay members and my Unlock n8n members inside of my community. And in this case, on the left side of the panel, if you head into the influencer search, you can also see the top influencers based on keywords. So that way, if you want to type in n8n as an example, you should be able to see all the top influencers with the amount of followers that each one of those influencers have. So in this case, for example, Nicholas Boucher over here, if I click into his LinkedIn profile, I can actually see that he runs AI Finance Club. Clearly, he talks about AI for finance teams. And that way, if we know that this is his LinkedIn profile, on the left side of the screen over here, we can click on profile engagements. We can click on manage in the top right-hand corner. And then at the bottom of the screen, you can click on add another profile and copy and paste Nicholas's LinkedIn profile URL. And after I input the LinkedIn profile URL of a specific individual, I can see everyone that has ever engaged with their LinkedIn posts in the past. And again, you may be thinking, oh yes, I need to pay $50 a month or $70 per month for a tool like Trigify. But when you get this amount of high intent data already enriched with the LinkedIn profiles of all of these individuals, their full names, the companies they work for, the company sizes, and all of this cool stuff over here, and you can even see what they commented or whether they liked the specific post, straight away you can reach out with a tiny bit more relevance using a tool like clay.com. And if you're unsure about how to use clay.com, guess what? I'll actually include a free clay.com course in the guide, which will be the top link in the description down below underneath the video. So you literally have no excuse for not knowing how to use this high intent data in order to find new solution aware automation services too. Now, I realize that I may sound a bit passive aggressive when talking about the client acquisition side of things here. However, I'm a big believer into the fact that the better outputs come from the better inputs. So in this case, if you're trying to get free scraped data for $0, chances are you're going to end up with zero, and you're probably going to struggle with the client acquisition side of things. As opposed to using one of these methods, whether it's Scrapely, Trigify, or scraping Slack communities, yes, it may set you $25 back. However, it's going to be worthwhile because you're going to get higher intent data than just pulling up random lists from a static database like Apollo, which is probably outdated by a couple of months in the first place. Moving on, the second thing that I can't stress enough is that after you found a list of people that are solution aware, who already follow n8n or engage with some sort of automation related content, be it automation thought leaders like Liam Otley, Nick Sarayev, or someone else in the space, in my opinion, the easiest thing to pitch them will be a free automation. So if you have a look at my current website, our claim is that we can automate all the manual work that a sales team is currently doing. And over here, we're prompting folks to apply for free custom automation. Now, in my opinion, no one loves doing free work. And I know a lot of people are going to say, yeah, but you're not making money on that first project if you're building a free custom automation. However, by offering a free custom automation, first of all, it will make it a lot easier for you to book in sales calls. Secondly, it will mean that you can build up social proof and testimonials and case studies a lot faster, especially if you offer the free automation just for the first 20 clients or for the first 10 clients to bring you on board. And then thirdly, by offering a free automation in the first place, even if your service delivery on the first few projects is not great, people will still leave you a nice reference because they're getting the automation for free. So they have no reason to complain. So essentially, all I recommend you do is you go after people that are solution aware, you get that list of people, you send them an email saying, oh, hey, I saw you engage with a bunch of n8n content. Of course, you can personalize it using a tool like Twain.ai or Clay. You offer them a free automation in return for a call, and then on that call, make sure to follow something similar to the closer sales script. And if you're unfamiliar with a closer sales script, I'll make sure to add this into the guide underneath the video so you can check it out for yourself. But as a quick 360 overview of the script, all it requires you to do is first of all clarify why prospect jumps on a call with you. So for example, it could be something like business owners like you hop on a call with me. Okay, and if you're not familiar with a closer sales script just now, it basically combines everything that I learned turn over the last 4 years of doing sales calls pretty much every single day into one sales script. And closer is an acronym where C stands for clarifying why the lead attended the call in the first place. And of course, I'll be giving away this exact sales script if you click into the top link in the description down below. But for the time being, let me just walk you through the script. So at the very start, when we're clarifying why the prospect showed up the call, I typically like to ask the prospect why they chose to hop on this call and what specifically they wanted to cover on this call. After that, I'll lay out the agenda and I explain to them that typically whenever I speak to owners or founders or directors like themselves, the reason they're there on this type of call is because they hear all the hype, all the noise around AI and automations. They hear about tools like n8n and Zapier and make.com. They have a lot of processes in mind that they want to scope and automate. However, they never have the time to actually go about executing on a lot of those thoughts. And essentially, whenever I lay out the agenda in this part of the call, I try to empathize with the prospects and at the same time just explain to them that this call is a risk-free way for them to first of all scope their first automation, answer a bunch of questions about the current processes that they do manually, and on the basis of this, I will do a little audit and I'll send across a business case for them so that they can decide if a free automation is something that they want to take me up on or not. And regardless, based on that, we can then see if a paid working relationship is something that we can explore in the future as well. And again, I'm not going to be reading this out step by step because I'm sure you can read for yourself. And the thing that's super critical, as I mentioned earlier, CLOSE is an acronym, so we already clarified why they're on the call. We laid out the agenda. Now it's time to overview their pain points. And for this, we need to first of all understand what are the processes that they're doing manually, and this will all be based on situational questions. For example, how are you currently doing your client onboarding process as an example? And then based on that, we also want to then understand the impact, and preferably we want to understand it in numerical terms, like how many hours is spent on a weekly basis for them to manually go and review job boards as an example. Because based on that, in the business case and a proposal, we can then communicate how many hours they will be saving, and of course, based on that, we can then price our proposal accordingly. So this is the overview pain point section, and then based on that we can then sell them the solution. And again, there is a bunch of stuff that you can read over here for yourself, and the idea is not to pitch your services per se, but instead you will say something like, oh hey, speaking to you today reminds me of speaking to this other agency owner that was also fed up with their client onboarding process. Based on that, we scoped it out in a couple of days. It did require a follow-up call, a quick form submission, and on the back of that we could turn around a minimal viable product flow back to them. They integrated it into their agency and now they're like over the moon and happy, and their onboarding process is fairly automated. Now, would you be keen to take me up on our free automation offer? It will only cost you $1. And the main idea behind setting a price of $1 is just for them to build that trust that they can pay you, even if it's just like $1, which is like no money at all to the clients. But in that case, you can actually count them as a client per se, even if they pay that amount to you in the first place. So this is when you essentially sell them the solution. Then you can empathetically handle any questions, FAQs, objections, wherever. That will be a separate section. And then finally reinforce the next steps at the end of the call, whereby you just say, okay, cool. Typically on back of this call, I will send you a form to fill in. Based on that form, I will send you like a quick business case. And then after you pay $1, I can basically build out the automation for you. And that will require 2 separate check-in calls. Does that sound okay? What's the best email to send the information to, blah, 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 right? So essentially this is the quick 6-step closer sales scripts that I follow in order to sell to those solution-aware prospects that we talked about in the first place. And by getting your foot in the door, you can spot inefficiency in other processes. And that way, you can go from charging $1 for one simple automation all the way through to charging $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, assuming that you do a good job on the free automation in the first place, because you would have deposited so much goodwill that the prospect already knows, hey, if I choose to automate these things and if this free automation lives up to the hype, I'm going to be spending thousands of dollars with you rather than anyone else, because you actually took the time to understand my business, scope the use cases, give me some free value upfront, and so on. So for that reason, I do think on the client acquisition side, the closer sales script is super useful, the free automation offer is super useful, and targeting any sort of solution and problem-aware prospects is recommended on my side as well. By the way, if you want me to film a separate 2-3 hour video where I just sit down and build out a client acquisition system completely from scratch for my own agency, and I will literally film every single loom, every single email draft, every LinkedIn DM message that I send out, I can probably spend my entire Sunday just filming this so that you can see the principles and the steps that I take in order to bring in more clients on board for my agency. If that's something that you're interested in at all, make sure to comment that down below, and I will be absolutely buzzing to record that. But first of all, I need to validate that anyone will watch it. So make sure to comment something down below. Double check they're subscribed, like this video. And the main parts behind especially getting your first 5-10 client on the client acquisition side of things is that realistically, you will be pretty crap at service delivery. Because if you think about doing anything for the first time, you're not going to be the most competent person in the world. So this is why it's super important to just charge $1 for the first couple of projects or give a free automation upfront for those prospects to take you up on it. Because that way the expectations are a lot lower. You can actually get the prospects to agree to feature in a case study or in a testimonial in return for free automation as well. And you can add them to every single proposal as a reference point, right? And if you've seen my proposal template before, I believe I have about 20 case studies, testimonials, and reference contacts. And probably 5 or 6 of them have been people for who we've implemented systems completely for free. And of course, these were not like fully built-in system. It was just a 3-step n8n flow, or just one simple clay table, or a 2-step zap inside a Zapier, right? It doesn't have to be overly complicated. The main idea behind this is just to deliver something up front in return for just nice written words about your service, so that you can basically learn and earn a little amount in parallel at the same time. So this is pretty much everything that I had to share when it comes to client acquisition. And now moving on, let's talk about the client onboarding process. In most cases, after the prospect agrees to take you up on your automations offer, be it a free automation or paid automation, assuming that you want to do it the right way and you want to be protected by a contract, in that case, I would typically recommend that you go out there, generate a contract. In my case, I just use ChatGPT to generate most contracts. And again, if you check out the top link in the description down below, I'll even be giving away the mock contract template I use right now with my clients. So you can see over here, there are some placeholders for the company name of the clients, the deliverables, the contract length, the payment terms, the payment amount, and all that stuff. And it's a pretty straightforward contract template. So I'll be giving this away as well. And whether you want to automate the onboarding process, in that case, you could use a tool like PandaDoc or SignRequest. And assuming that you're actually pretty decent at automations, the trigger will always be a form submission. That form submission will populate the contract inside of SignRequest or inside of PandaDoc. And on the back of that, you can create a payment link inside of Stripe, send it out to the prospects to pay and sign the contracts. And then as soon as that's done, you can send them an onboarding form. And by the way, if this all sounds complicated and you want to be hand-holded step by step along the way, then just check out my Unlock n8n course. It's literally the most comprehensive, the most beginner-friendly and fastest way for you to learn n8n and to be able to automate a lot of these internal processes, be it for your own agency, or if you would then want to provide this as a service for other businesses. And essentially, after the contract is signed, the invoice is paid, the onboarding form is filled in, that's the point at which you can count the clients to be fully onboarded. At that point, you may need to get access into their existing accounts. I would recommend for you to charge the clients for their own cost of tools. So in that case, you can get a client to use your affiliate link to buy an n8n account, in which case you will be getting about 10% kickback on their monthly payments to n8n. And more than that, you can also get the client to sign in using all of their credentials into the relevant tools inside of n8n. And that way, whenever you set up any automations from scratch inside of n8n, you're already logged into their accounts in platforms like Google Sheets, HubSpot, or whatever up tool you're connecting natively inside of n8n. Of course, after the client onboarding stage, you will provide the client with daily or weekly updates. I would recommend having your clients on Slack, Microsoft Teams, Google Chat, WhatsApp, Telegram, or whatever communication channel the client prefers to use, because that way you're always just a message away rather than having to send long emails and remember to sign off with like kind regards or whatever you choose to put into your signature. So that's as far as the client onboarding process goes. I don't think there is too much to it beyond this. And worth noting that if you want to compartmentalize this, and I know that's quite a big word, took me like 3 takes to say it just now, but if you want to become dangerously good at n8n, and if you also want to be able to build out the client onboarding automations for your own agency, just go check out the Unlock n8n course. I know I've mentioned it quite a few times already. I actually feel quite guilty just trying to sell it to you all the time. But the problem is, whenever you create long videos like this one, you actually need to remind the audience that there is also a paid thing that you charge for, because right now you could just binge watch a bunch of videos and probably get halfway there using the free resources on YouTube. However, in my opinion, inside of that Unlock n8n course, you're going to get great value for money, considering that we're giving you away all the different templates. We build out all the workflows completely from scratch, node by node, and we're also available there for any quick questions and answers, and we even update the course pretty much on a weekly basis. So if you want to check that out, again, it will be one of the links in the description down below. greatly appreciate it if you check it out. Okay, congrats. You've onboarded the client and now it's time to actually deliver the service. So this brings us nicely to the third part, which is the client service delivery. And the client service delivery will be so much simpler if in the first place, prospect call, whereby you fill in a spreadsheet similar to this one. So in this case, you'll have the name of the client at the top. So in this case, B2B boosted. And you can then map out the steps that they would take manually in order to perform the process that you're trying to automate for. So in this case, you can see that the inputs is a client contract. As soon as it's signed, we send an email, then we create an invoice and so on. And based on this, what you want to do is first of all, write down the manual action, then establish any sort of templates or documents that you would need to have access to in order to pull off these steps when you automate them. More than that, you then need to establish the platform that will be used, because this is very important for you to know which node to choose inside of n8n. You can also have a separate page with the login details over here. So essentially for each one of the tools, you would know what the login details are, like the API keys or the login details using the email and passwords. Based on that, you can also add a sent priority. So obviously the first couple of steps could be the number 1 priority, number 2 priority. But then let's say on step 6, and you are waiting for the clients to give you logins to something, you could just put another drop-down option like no rush, just to make sure that, you don't rush to step 6, for which you didn't have the right information from the client just yet. And then on the right hand side over here, you can see some comments from the clients or from yourself. And on the right hand side over here, you could have a separate comment section whereby you are able to exchange comments either with the client or with your internal teams, so that it makes it a lot easier to actually deliver upon the promises. So assuming that you've done the scoping on this, only thing you really need to do is head into n8n, plug in these nodes. So in this case, I'm just going to head straight into my n8n account. I'm going to click on first step. I can then go about selecting my trigger and all the consequent actions using all those that are listed over here under the platforms to be used section. And as an oversimplification, the way that it works is, to start with, you make sure that you have your login details and all of those scoping details mapped out properly. As soon as the client buys n8n and all of these other tools, you build it out. You call this an MVP1, aka your minimal viable product automation number 1, and you just frame it as the first iteration of the workflow. You show it to a client over a quick call. The client reviews the automation that you've built for them. They tell you what is not working, what tweaks they want to be made to it. Then you tweak it. Then you call this MVP2. You share it with the clients again. The client gives you some final feedback. And then hopefully by the time that you give them the third iteration of the workflow, they're happy with it. They sign off on it. And that's the point at which you can go out there and actually document the workflow for them. And as I mentioned already in the past videos, if you go into the workflow and if you download the actual workflow, you can then head into ChatGPT and just basically drag the JSON just downloaded from the workflow into ChatGPT and say something like, document this workflow for me, for my clients. And then you just click on enter. And that way you'll basically create a pretty decent workflow summary with the overview, the purpose, the step-by-step workflow breakdown and how to maintain it. And then on top of that, at the bottom over here, I can say, write down how to maintain it, right? And then it will just basically write that down and you can copy and paste it back into the actual this. Now, if you want to see how the best workflows inside of n8n are documented, just head over to n8n.io/workflows and just click on any of these random words over here. And if you click on click to explore, you should be able to see that most workflows will have a video. So if you click on plus over here, you can expand on that. They also have a written breakdown underneath the video to explain what's going on there. And it also tells you how to maintain the workflow. So if you want to take some information from how to document workflows, just head over there, look at a couple of the templates, and I'm sure you'll learn a couple of new things. And finally, after you hand over the documented workflow over to the client, you need to probably agree either on an hourly troubleshooting fee or on a future ongoing project fee. So if you're looking to upsell or cross-sell the client, in that case, whenever that specific automation that you've built out for them breaks, you want to make sure that you're still charging them for hourly maintenance or hourly fixing of the workflow, because these automations may last a month, maybe 2 months, maybe a year, but at some point there will be an error message. One of the APIs may be invalid or whatever other error may occur. And trust me, over the last 3 years, I've had countless moments where I forgot to discuss with a client an ongoing troubleshooting fee, and I ended up spending weekends and my evenings basically troubleshooting workflows for which I charged like $1,000 or $2,000, which was not the best use of my time, realistically speaking. That's basically that. By the end of this section, I hope you learned a couple of new things about client acquisition, client onboarding, and client service delivery for automation-related services. And if you found this helpful, as always, just triple check there, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and if you have any sort of feedback or any questions about this part, just comment them down below. I literally reply to my comments before I go to sleep on most days because it pops up on my iPad and I just scroll through the comments, make sure that I like all of your comments, make sure that I reply to all of them one by one. And sometimes if you even request another video on something that I mentioned throughout the video, I'll actually add that to my pipeline of future videos that I'll put on this channel. All right, guys. I super appreciate you checking out this course on n8n. If you enjoyed it, by all means, just double check that you're subscribed to this YouTube channel. And I promise you that in the coming weeks and months, I'll be building out a lot of AI workflows and a lot of AI agents completely from scratch in a beginner-friendly tutorial-like format. So tune in for some future videos. And in the meantime, if you want to get access of all of the resources that I mentioned throughout the video, it will be the top link in the description down below. So go check it out, click the top link in the description and get all of those freebies. And finally, just a quick shameless plug of my Unlock n8n course, which will be the top link in the description down below. Go check it out. I spent the last 6 months creating that course, so I honestly believe it will be the best course on the market. And it literally just costs you one-off fee, which is cheaper than most school communities that charge you on a monthly basis to consume very similar automations related content. Now, if you watch this far and you've heard of this tool called clay.com, but you're not entirely sure on what clay.com is or how you can use it for your specific use cases, by all means, check out the next video in which I'll walk you through everything that I know about Clay and how you can possibly implement it for your business. Anyways, I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one. Cheers.